Welcome everyone to our panel discussion today. This is part of our 21st Century Agenda series, and this is the last webinar in our series, which is on building the capacity to conduct equitable research. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We did have a series of webinars in this group, and we encourage you to go back and view those recordings. They're all available on our YouTube channel. We'll share the link for that as well. I'd like to take a moment to welcome all of our speakers today that we have on the call. We have a big group with us, and I'm going to just share a little bit about each of them. I'd like to welcome Jessica Elm. She is our speaker today with Like the Tree Consulting, and also Sandra Killett and Robin Robbins, lived experience experts, and joining them, Julie Collins, the VP of Practice Excellence from Child Welfare League of America. I'd also like to welcome Kirk O'Brien, their independent data and evaluation contractor, rounding out their group. Please also help me welcome Peter Pecora. He's the Managing Director of Research Services for Casey Family Programs and a professor at the University of Washington and fellow at the Academy. We're also joined today by Mary McKay, former Academy president and vice provost of interdisciplinary initiatives at Washington University in St. Louis. Nicholas Asher and Sanjam Dutt are program coordinators with the Academy as well. And Gautam Yadama, professor and dean of the Boston College of Social Work and board fellow. Our board member at the Academy is also joining us for our Q&A moderation today. And I'm Stephanie Anderson. I'm the manager of the Clark Fox Policy Institute at Washington University in St. Louis, and happy to welcome all of you today. I will hand it over to Mary to kick us off.
Wonderful. So hello, everyone. Hello to those participants that have joined us live. And for those of us that are watching on YouTube, welcome. We have a terrific program for you today. And so on behalf of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare, I want to welcome you. I do want to acknowledge that this series has come about as a result of a real partnership with three incredible foundations: the Annie Casey Foundation's Casey Family Programs and W.T. Grant Foundation. We're grateful for the support, investment, and collaboration. I think that I will say one word about this effort. We are really attempting to bring a couple of strands of influence together in this webinar series, and then hopefully to lead the field to do the same. We want to bring the very best evidence that there is to bear on how do we improve the circumstances of young people, their loved ones, the communities within which they live. We want to bring that evidence, and we want to integrate and combine that with collaborators, with lived experience, young people, family members, community leaders, provider leaders, to really come up with new solutions to a set of circumstances that really do burden children and their families and communities. And so I'm incredibly grateful. Today is kind of the, if you will, the hallmark of this series, which is we have people from a variety of perspectives going to talk about building the capacity to conduct equitable research. Since this is the last in the series, I must actually just acknowledge the important leadership that Stephanie, you have brought to this effort. Nicholas and Sanjan, we could not have coordinated this without you. And then I'm going to turn it over to Peter, and also I see our colleague Alex on the line. Your leadership, without your leadership, this would not have been possible, this entire effort. And so we're incredibly grateful. And Peter, I know you always thank everybody else, but I just want to say today that your leadership has been extraordinary. So we'll hear from you, and then you'll turn it over to our speakers today. So please go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Stephanie, for the setting up the whole context for things today. My job, Stephanie's going to put a slide up here that sort of does an overview, but since about May of 2019, and we'll go to the next slide there, a diverse group of researchers, DEI experts, people with lived experience with the child welfare system and policy experts have worked together to identify research gaps to enhance the development of a 21st century child welfare, 21st century approach to child and family well-being system. And what began as a partnership between Casey Family Programs, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and the William T. Grant Foundation has evolved into a much wider coalition of academic, national, and philanthropic organizations. And all of that work has been bolstered by extensive participation from individuals with life experience with child welfare. You'll hear from some of them today. We believe that new studies should address the most critical issues facing the field. And if we can go to the next slide, we can show you the categories of the top 23 research gaps that a national consensus building process helped identify. They're summarized in a high level way there. We do believe that the new study should address these most critical issues facing the field so that the research findings can be used to support innovative policy, practice, and changes in funding. Now, currently, the Research Agenda Coalition is encouraging federal, state, and local foundations to address these high priority research gaps. And we're also actively promoting conversations in a few other topic areas. And these topic areas include helping the research community see study participants as partners in the research, as part of our prioritization of and our commitment to social justice. So today you're going to hear from panelists about efforts to improve how research is done, while the rest of the initiative at times is focused on helping to get more studies funded in these high priority areas. So if you would like more information, there's a 5-page initiative overview, the link to which Alex will put that in the chat, along with a link to the website that has the equity tool, which is the focus of today's webinar. So thanks for investing your time today with us, and a special thanks to our speakers, and I'll turn that over to the panel now. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so I see my slide is up. So this is Sandra Collette. I'm a social justice organizer and consultant, and I have been a part of the research team since 2020. So, you know, these are what you're looking at is the guiding values for the research agenda when we started. And I will tell you that you know, you can read them for yourself, or I can read them for you. But the first one, being bold and transformative, was challenging for the team. And I would say from my perspective, right? Because as we were discussing moving forward and developing the gaps, there was some part of the conversation that we remained the same, right? So as much as we wanted to be bold and transformative, we were coming up with things that were not bold and transformative. In fact, they were kind of holding us back. And the other for me was prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was a challenge because at this particular time, society was in unrest around racism. There was George Floyd going on. And so this raised us to another level of, well, how do we really do this work, right? We had to be very open and very honest. And I will tell you some of the challenges for me as a lived experience person, being a part of the research agenda, coming in 2020 was that, and it was a good thing, right? The foundation was already set. There was a lot of things that already happened, and that was great. But coming to the table and being there with researchers that were charged, right, to bring certain information around research that would influence the child welfare system, and knowing that that information had been harmful to families and community, right? So the challenge for me was how can I say that or not say it, right? And then we would be looking at the same thing, right? You're here, but you're not expressing the truth, and therefore we don't move forward. So I would have to give so much credit to the team, because what happened was, in coming forth and being honest about being in that space and how to address that in partnership with the researchers, right? Leveled partnership and power, and not offend anyone, so that we could do this work together. And I will tell you that the team made that very possible. I often say the work halted, but it didn't halt. It actually paused. So that allowed us to move forward in the work and really address the issues. And next slide, please. So with that being said, we had to address some internal complications, right? We had to talk a lot about our internal biases. And for me, when we began to develop the gap questions, I remember being challenged by the DEI experts, right? And it was like, well, is that not bias? And I'm thinking, I've been doing this work for 20 something years, and that's not bias. But the reality of it is that it was. And so with that being said, it helped us as a team, in my perspective, to go inner and to say that we must also address the biases that we have, unbeknownst to us, right? And we began to do that work. And I don't believe that we even knew that we would be at this juncture, because at some point, I think it was decided that lived experience people, that was the end of our role in the agenda. But if we were going to talk about being participatory in research and changing the way the work was done, then we needed to have that long-lasting input and involvement and leveled equal partnership with lived experience folk. And I think for me, if I could say anything, I would say that the ability to stay with it, to be committed to the work, whether it is through your programming you already have or what you want to develop, it's going to be very necessary. I'm not sure if my 10 minutes is up, but I will turn it over to Julie Collins and just say that with that being said, that deep dive into wherever you're at in your work is going to be very important. Thank you. Julie?
Thanks, Sandra. I appreciate it. I think you've nicely contextualized a little bit some of the stuff for what I and the rest of the panelists are going to really be doing for you all. So as you'll see on the next slide, one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about is why we even bothered or started the process of really creating this tool. And as Peter and Sandra and I and others were going out talking about the research agenda itself and educating folks around it, and then we started really focusing on that DEI framework that was just up on the screen, what we began to hear from the audience, whether it was researchers, often it was even program folks that design programs or evaluate the programs. And they started really asking us, well, how do we really do that? How do we embrace the kind of framework that you're talking about and move to have more of that transformative kind of research that the research agenda is really trying to strive for, and what does that look like? And so we took that to heart, of course. We went back to the steering committee and had conversations around all of that and kind of made a commitment for the overall national steering committee to move forward and do something, be responsive to the field and help create some kind of tool or something that would be useful. And identified then a subgroup that would work on that. And we represented many voices, the research voice, the evaluation CQI kind of voice. I was more the person on the program side. And then we had a nice mix of people with the lived experience, kind of representing what you would want to be doing, whether you're doing a research project or, program design or evaluation, etc. You need the right, a good combination of voices and eyes at the table to create the right kind of team to get you the bold and the transformative that you've been hearing about. So as we went about it, we really tried to, think about the pieces that we would be drawing on and kind of what were the important parts that we needed to attend to in terms of components or trying to reach and get, and we're guided by the National Steering Committee and kind of our own wisdom and teaming effort as we tried to figure some of this out. So a few of the things that we realized we really needed to do was make it practical. It needed to be actionable, not replace already existing tools, but really enhance and be there as part of supporting the good work that was going to go on and making sure that we were providing the kind of resources that were really needed to help with the success of it. But making sure it was going to be short, pithy, practical in terms of being able to be useful. And, but key to it, and, Sandra has nicely articulated this, and you're going to hear more from Robin in a few minutes. We wanted to make sure that we were really creating the space so that people with the lived experience were really, truly equal partners at the table in order to do that. And so we recognized we needed to create the space in this, with this tool to really have conversations, meaningful conversations, as well as to really create kind of that space to build relationship, to build trust. Sandra kind of alluded to this. It's not always so easy, and especially when you're bringing people that have had bad experiences with researchers or even with the program people, and the programs don't fit what they really need. That it's not always a lot of trust there that you're actually going to do something with it and do something that's going to be meaningful, and they're not just sitting at the table, but none of us are drinking the Kool-Aid kind of thing. So really want to make sure that we were intentional in creating that kind of space and really thinking within the context of more of that teaming kind of relationship and equal partnership aspect of it. So as we went through that process, as you'll see on the next slide, one of the things that we spent time trying to understand and what we would do is how to organize it and around how we needed to organize it. So Sandra nicely talked about the two slides that she had, the values and the principles and the framework of the DEI. And so what we realized was we needed to kind of merge them in some way. And these 6 principles that are listed, as you'll see, Stephanie, I don't know, are you having, oh, there you go. Okay, so as you see on this slide, these 6 are really reflective of them, and they really are more the action-oriented kind of aspect of it. And what we did in organizing is under each of these principles, we kind of said what the actions are, what you would expect to see in place, be doing in order to really demonstrate that you're meeting those principles, and that will get you where you need to be to have more of that equity kind of focus, and the really ensuring that you're bringing to the table the people with the lived experience and creating whatever the project is. So research, the program evaluation, design, whatever way you want to frame that, and making sure that you're really intentionally getting to the equity aspect of it. And as we were doing that, we realized a number of other things were going to be critical to make sure that somehow we were including as part of this tool, and maybe not in the actual assessment aspect of it, because what we realized, they were things that needed to happen earlier. So the tool itself, and I think somebody already put a link to it, so some of you might actually be looking at it, gives some of that background information. We had lots of conversation around words, and so realized, as one does this as a team, we all come from different sets of eyes, different experiences, different knowledge base, all of those kinds of different lenses, right, in a sense. And so we realized that we were having a lot of time trying to say, okay, well, what does that word mean for you? What does it mean for you? So we decided it would be really helpful to those of you, hopefully, that will use the tool, and anybody else in their teams would be able to know this is how those words are used within the context of the tool. And then some of the other pieces that we realized in that preparatory kind of part of it, we needed to put in the front end of it in order to better guide whoever's going to be the project lead or the principal investigator, whatever language, makes sense in terms of the project that you have. And sometimes we recognize, right, there might be more than one, but really making sure that you're ready in order to really do this dance, so to speak. And some of you might have experience and some of you might not in bringing people to with lived experience to the table. I have lots of experience from my work in Canada in another field in terms of behavioral health, but it's not so evident and doesn't happen the same way in child welfare research as it does in many of the other research fields. And so we recognize you'd all be on a spectrum somewhere along that experience. And so we needed to attend to it and tried to be really intentional, and included a resource section at the end with some of those really relevant resources that could help with some of that preparation aspect that you really need to be attending to. The other thing that we realized, and Sandra spoke very well to this in terms of her own personal experience related to addressing bias and assumptions, and realized that that's present for all of us. And we come from different worlds, we come from different countries, we come from different, communities even. And therefore, it's really important that we not only do it one time, but we do it often and regularly in order to check ourselves so that we really can maintain that teaming kind of environment and really have a successful, project that will really gain and garner some really good results. And so provided some guiding questions for you all as part of that process that we thought might be helpful and in that journey that you might be have to take or be taking. The other thing that we're very intentional about, and we know this from our own experience, we know this because Sandra and Robin and many of the other people with lived experience have educated and informed us and helped us to learn that we really need to make sure that there's a great intentionality to involving people with the lived experience. And so we provide some information around that. It's built into the actual parts of the tool under these principles, but we also acknowledge and provide a little bit more information around some of the key things that you really need to attend to as part of doing it in order to really be successful. And so some of those pieces that are really in an aspect, some of the pre-work that needs to happen is making sure that there's some kind of protocol in place so you're having equitable compensation across everybody. The people with lived experiences, because they don't have a PhD after their name, maybe they do, but that the lived experience is the part that they bring to the table, and that has a richness that we don't have as professionals or as researchers necessarily, and therefore it's so critical that we are respectful and really make sure that we're giving equitable compensation and recognition for that expertise, that we're valuing it, that it really does matter. And many of us know from experience, it really helps with getting better results. So we know it's worth it. The other kinds of things is making sure there's an orientation plan. And that, I say that even just in terms of people like myself. I'm not a researcher, so I do need some orientation to what some of the research pieces are, but really an orientation to make sure that the people with lived experience can actually be equal partners at the table with you, and are right from the very beginning, that they're not being left behind because we haven't attended to that issue. And then a few other things is really recognizing and trying to build in and pay attention to any training needs that might be attended to for them, what kind of resources, where we can make sure that they can get the information by way of example, and really creating opportunities so that they can really meaningfully participate. So, I raise it because often they come to the table, maybe they give some information and we think of it more as an advisor group, but this is an advisor group. They are equal people at the table in terms of helping to figure out what the research should be or what the project should be, et cetera, how it should happen, what the analysis is in terms of the results, what do you do with the results, communicating the results, for really being there with you equally across the whole of the team. And that is the intention of this tool, is to help you really understand how to do that. And it will help get you that equity piece that we're really trying to emphasize as part of our communication today. So on the next slide, you'll see this is the wonderful team that came together and struggled to figure all of this out. And Robin is one of those individuals, and I'm going to turn over to Robin at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'm really happy to hear all of the things my presenters are saying before me so that I can add my perspective. We've heard about the research agenda, its guiding principles and values. You had just had a great overview of the equity tool, including the who, the folks who were part of it. And so now it's my turn, right? And as you heard, my name is Robin Robbins, and I am one of the 6 lived experts on the research agenda team. And I was invited to participate in my role as a foster parent. And I was a foster parent. I've been a foster parent for more than 20 years in Northern California. And we've had, more than 50 children come through our home during that time. And we started fostering in order to help families heal. We weren't there to adopt. We weren't there to save children. We really wanted to make a difference in lives of children. But what happened was, about halfway through my experience, I realized that changes weren't happening. Things weren't changing. The system in place wasn't making a difference for families. No matter how hard I tried to help and be part of that, change wasn't happening. So you can imagine I was pretty excited when I got invited to be part of this research agenda team, especially those words bold and transformative. And you're right, Sandra, we had to work to make that happen, but those are the words that hooked me, because I was aware that research drives change. And so I had some hope that this project was really going to make a difference. And that was back in 2020 or before. So it's been a while. I was invited to do some work for about 6 months with the research team. That's all they told me when I joined the project. So I did that. And at the very first meeting, I showed up in a virtual meeting with another lived expert in a room full of people who all had letters after their name and were researchers. So you can imagine it was not the most comfortable first meeting, and we were there to look at the gaps. But unfortunately, I had not brought my Google Translator for researcher language, right? I hadn't a clue what was going on in the room. So it took some time to get up to speed. But here's what happened. What happened was this amazing equity tool, this DEI framework, it was called at the time, was also created at the beginning of this project. And so I read through the framework, and then I will never forget the experience of reading the paragraph that listed the names of the folks who were marginalized, we were going to be paying attention to, being tender with, and providing the equity that was needed for these folks to participate. And at the end of the sentence in tiny little letters was lived experience expert. That was me. I felt included. So that was the beginning of my ability to really be myself and feel like equity was possible, just because people were going to be listening to my voice. So, of course, I took that wonderful framework, by the way, and used it in all my work at the time. I've told other folks this too. I knew it was for the research agenda, but I used it for everything. All my trainings, any papers I was writing, conversations I was having with folks, I would go through those principles and the questions underneath and run my work through them. And I used this as a guide in all the work I was doing. So it was fabulous. And also, of course, we used it in the work that we did all these years in this wonderful research agenda, including identifying the gaps, prioritizing them, the listening sessions, many of those, the consensus convenings, all of our steering committee meetings, all of our lived expert meetings, presentations, workshops, all of it. Every bit of it was informed by this equity document. And so you can imagine, when I was invited to become part of the subcommittee to turn this framework into a tool that was going to be used by all of you in such marvelous ways, I was pretty happy about that. So, and we also, through every step of the way, you heard Julie talking about every step of the way, we used these principles to do the work, right? So we were intentional about every sentence, about every word, about every section, which questions were going to go under which section. And then we'd put it all in place and it would look fabulous. And then we'd move them all again and we'd change it again. And every meeting we'd get together and we'd look and we'd think and we'd use the principles. And we continued to do that until we got it to a place where it's ready for you today. We would elevate the part that I remember is we elevated the section on people with lived experience to near the front of the document, right? To have that flow of equity in place as you look at the actual tool. So, and also, as Julie had mentioned, in order to do that, we became very clear that that pre-work that's in the beginning of the tool that Julie described really was important. You heard me talk about being at my first meeting and not having a clue what anybody was saying. And so it's important that you look through this pre-work part of the document if you haven't read it already, and look at it again and pay attention to the first part that talks about project leadership, really looking at your own biases and paying attention to individually what assumptions you might have, and also what might be in place in the system you're working in as you began your project. And I was thinking about that when I looked at, I think it was Quincy's comment in the chat, talking about preparing the team to be able to provide this equity for people with lived experience and the other team members, right? We came into a room full of researchers. It was hard to find our place in there. But if you do this pre-work, if project leadership has started this conversation, created a foundation to continue to have these conversations about everybody's feelings about their biases, about equity, then you will normalize the possibility of this continuing throughout the project. And perhaps that will bring team members to a place of understanding where the work can move forward. So that part of the pre-work, and as Julie said, the questions that are there, I love those questions, such as, what have you done to foster a sense of safety for open sharing? That's a fabulous question. So you can use those examples. You can also find some of your own to put in there as well. So this is a really important place to start. And Julie also mentioned, she mentioned an orientation. Now, having that in place before you start is a very good idea. We learned by doing on this research agenda, right? We tried some things on, saw what didn't work, moved in another direction and tried them on. But if you can do this work ahead of time, if you can think about it intentionally, you're going to have a lot of things in place that's going to make not just the onboarding of the people with lived experience a smoother transition, but all the team members feel more comfortable in their roles as they work together. And so she mentioned the orientation, resources, assessments, trainings. Now, I'll share an experience about that, because these aren't just for the people with lived experience, right? Some of the trainings might need to be for the other team members. And early on, I bet you remember this one, Julie, we did have a training which the purpose of which was to help the foundations and the other people in place learn to work with people with lived experience. So it was a trial and error type of training, and I don't think it met all of our needs very well, but what it did do is create those conversations of what is needed. How can we create these relationships? How can we build a sense of trust and importance in a team and work together, and with coming from all these different directions of what we knew and what we had to offer. And so that was really powerful part of our work. And we moved forward, and I'm going to share with you one of the supports that I found incredibly important for me as a person with lived experience. I still do for every part of this work. I'm going to use it today, and that is our group of lived experience experts that met regularly and still does during this entire process. So I had an opportunity with project leadership there to listen to us, to share what was working and what wasn't working for me in a group of my peers in this process, so to speak, right? I knew that the folks there were having similar experiences to me. And so we were there to reassure each other, to back each other up, to maybe challenge each other with, trying on some new things and looking at our own assumptions and biases about researchers. For instance, researchers are people too, right? So we had that place to go. I had that place to go where I felt comfortable to share and be myself and try on new things and meet the challenges that came up during the process. Because as Sandra said, there were many of them. And we just continued to use this context, this context built of all these beautiful values and principles that we put together to be able to continue to do this work. So just if you have a buddy, if you have more than one lived experience person together on your team, have them get together, have them support each other. That really was an important part of my success in being part of this team. So I am going to encourage you all to take a look at this section as Julie did, and use it the way it is, or add your own ideas, but really think about it and just have your conversations ahead of time, right? Have your conversations with your team members. Mention to your team members, don't use acronyms, and think about the language they're using. Whatever comes up for you, use that space to build a safe and equitable space for you that will make you ready to create an incredible, bold, and transformative piece of work that's going to make a difference for these families, for those who are impacted with the research and the programs that you bring together. So I am now going to turn it over to you, Jessica, to give these folks maybe a little bit more hands-on view of our wonderful equity tool.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Jessica Elm. I am a citizen of Oneida Nation and a descendant of Stockbridge Munsee Band of the Mohicans. I'm currently coming to you from the traditional homelands of the Cherokee and the Muskegee Creek. I have worked with this lovely group for a few years now. I served on the, I'm currently serving on the steering committee with them as well. And so this group that has worked on the tool is really like a subcommittee of the steering committee. And most of the members on the steering committee participated in the development of the research agenda. I'll just say a little bit more about myself, and I'm going to move on really quickly, but I just wanted to mention that I personally was trained in community-based participatory research. And so that lens of doing and how to conduct research has always been a part of me. And so when I joined the group to develop the National Research Agenda, I was actually a little bit surprised about how few of the researchers had participated in that type of methodology. And so I just wanted to share that experience because there's, training, issues like training come into play with all of this, issues like tenure. Of course, we can't forget that there are these barriers for researchers, and researchers are indeed people too. So thank you, Robin. On that note, I want to move on to talking more about the slides. And yes, so as was mentioned previously, these principles, there's 6 of them. And each of them represent a set of items that are in the tool. And we really tried to develop the items very clearly, as others have already stated, but being intentional about each word that we used. Of course, it's just a small group of us, so we're not perfect, and there's some improvements that probably could be made. And we welcome hearing about feedback about language, ordering, any of those things. So please feel free to share that in the chat. So again, we have the 6 principles that were shown earlier. The first principle here is about engaging in bold and transformative work. And so this, I think it was Robin mentioned that this was like the core of what we were trying to do with the research agenda. We would always go back to, is this bold and transformative? And if not, maybe we should think about it some more, or maybe we should adapt it. The broad general idea being that we shouldn't be just doing research just to do research anymore. We need to advance the field to improve systems and make change. And so these 4 items, and again, we're trying to keep it pithy, as Julie said, not too long, and trying to make the tool usable and user-friendly. So you'll see that in this first principle, which is really trying to get at some of that higher level ideas there about bold and transformative work. So we can go to the next slide. The next principle about engaging individuals with lived expertise, we intentionally made this our number 2 principle. We at first were going to have it as the number 1 principle, but the prior principle is a little bit more overarching. And so we put this intentionally at number 2. Obviously, there's more items here. Because engagement can mean a lot of things. Engagement, some people think that's just at the beginning of a process when really it's ongoing. And so we really wanted to make sure there was enough items that really captured what this meant for us. And we can go to the next one. Principle number 3, strive for equity when conducting research and program evaluation. And program design, service delivery, and policy. So a quick note here is that the title actually of the tool mentions only researchers. and not program developers or evaluators or other possible users of the tool. And so this is currently a limitation. And so we are, again, accepting feedback about that. And we do acknowledge that most of these items are really geared toward research, and probably most of you here today are researchers or work in the research area. So again, that's a current limitation. Just wanted to point that out. That's what you'll see in the footnote there. So going back just for a minute, we were talking about the pre-work, that's been mentioned a few times. The pre-work, another word for that, or another phrase, is preparatory efforts and guidance. And that's on, I think, the third or fourth page of the tool. And again, those are the kind of a starting place or guidance for teams before they bring on people with lived expertise to the team to really get you ready in order to use this tool. So there's assumptions built into these items and these principles in that you would have already done the pre-work or the preparatory efforts and guidance as shown in the tool. Okay, the next slide. This principle was really one of the first things that we talked about as we were developing the research agenda. So there was 3 of us, diversity, equity, and inclusion experts, me and 2 others, and we were really coming together as a small team and trying to form these early principles. You'll see it in the framework if you look at that. Because we knew about these historical harms. I'm from American Indian background. My people have been harmed by research or excluded from research or marginalized in some way. And so this was really central from the beginning of the agenda process. And it's almost word for word as far as the first part of this principle from what we started with at the research agenda development to when we ended this final version that Robin really helped describe that process among our subcommittee of trying to apply these same principles as we're developing the tool. So there's a lot of iterative process. It went a little bit slower than we thought, even considering that we knew it would be slower. It's naturally slower when when you include new people or different voices. So that is a factor that even we had to come across and approach and think about. We wanted a quality tool more so than we wanted a tool that was just put out quickly. So let's go to the next slide. So number 5 is also heavily lingering from those early values and principles we used when developing the research agenda. And this one, for me, I feel like it's more of a reminder, reminding us all to consider the circumstances of the population that we're investigating, or the target population, or the population of focus. We really want to look at our findings and be critical of that, not just say, this X population, disproportionality is through the roof. We need to talk about why and how and what's the background and history of why that is. And so this for me is sort of a reminder. For others, it might not be so much. And those are some of the things that will come out as teams do their pre-work. Next slide. So striving for equity when using findings in decision-making. Again, I'm going to go back to the emphasizing doing the pre-work. So none of these items are built in stone. They really should reflect the values of your team. Really digging into what are your own values, what does equity mean to your team, will help shape the rest of, maybe you want to adapt some of these items to reflect more of the definition of equity as it means to your team. So for us, we did some of that early on, and that's why these items sort of turned out the way they did. Maybe your definition of equity is slightly different, and so you might change some of these items to reflect that. We can go to the next slide. So I imagine there's lots of questions and wondering, how do we actually apply this? What might this look like in the real world? And so I want to invite all of the guests to imagine a team that you have been on recently, maybe your current team, maybe your PI. Imagine being on the team, and then please, we're going to do a poll actually, instead of the chat. Hopefully it works. We're going to pull up a poll, and please respond to the poll using this item. This item is from the final principle that I just mentioned about equity. And the item says your team engages partners in the interpretation or implications of the data and findings. So think about what your team might come up with. Would your team agree? We do that a little bit. Would your team agree? We mostly do that. Please share what you think your team would come up with. And if the poll's not working, please enter your response into the chat. Give it a minute or so for you to ponder on that.
Jessica, it looks like Angela responded. She said a little. Anybody else that wanted to, even if you haven't been part of a team, you might think about one and how it might be relevant. We get a combination of a little and the preponderance seems to be a little. This is great.
Okay.
Thanks all of you for responding. One person had a tiny bit. Abby had some. So did Quincy. So a few people had some. It's great. Thanks for being such good teamies with us and providing your input. We've got a number of people that have added some, Brandy and Lucia, so that's good. Anybody else want to join? I don't see any new ones.
Okay.
Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you so much for participating in this exercise. I want to, based on the responses and just some more sort of characteristics of the tool, I want to share that the tool is really meant as a reflection item. It's not meant to say, compare your team to this gold standard team. It's really to be used over time to sort of mark where you're at, say, my team only does this a little bit, but we really want to be at mostly. Maybe our team agrees, let's revisit this in 6 months and see if we've tried to move that needle towards where we want to be. So it's meant to be used internally and again at the team level. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So now that we've done that reflection, I want to go to the next slide, which is a second part of this exercise. Now, sort of using that same team you were imagining, or same team you might be on, try to think about how you imagine your team would discuss the item. I posted the same item as here on this slide as well. And when I say how, what kind of process, do you feel like might happen? Would it be starting out as sort of a more authoritarian process, and there would be, some of that classic group adaptations with the forming and storming and norming? Or are there natural leaders in your group that would want to take the lead? Or how would you make space for people with lived expertise that maybe they're very new at this? Maybe they don't even have a computer at home. How and what kind of processes do you think that your team would embrace? Or maybe it would be a lot of, barriers and rockiness at first. If you could share some of your ideas and reflections about maybe even not your exact team, maybe an imaginary team. What kind of processes and how those processes might take place. If you could share what your thoughts are about those in the chat, that would be great.
As they're thinking about it, Jessica, certainly some of what Robin and, Sandra have been talking about shows even you some of the rockiness, right? Sometimes that happens, but I think they so nicely illustrated the need to really attend to that kind of the humility and the flexibility that's needed to say, okay, what can we learn from this, and what could we do a little differently in order to get us further along the path, right? Because it really is a journey. It's not something that poof, you can just do this effectively at the very beginning. But it looks like we're getting some good thoughts going on here. Related to some of what people are saying.
And I like what you just said, Julie. I also like to consider this sort of a heavy investment of time and effort early on, in which will end up being better data or better products or better policies because of the inclusion that's built into the tool, if it's used consistently. That's how I view it.
Yeah. And some people are acknowledging the rockiness that might be there, and the humbleness and forgiveness that you need to have in order to just, okay, didn't quite get that right, so what do we do? What do we learn? What do we need to do differently? Yeah.
One of my mentors, who's an expert in community-based participatory research, taught me that if you've never been spanked by a community, then you aren't doing the job right. So, that it's part of the process. There's going to be conflict, because of differences. It's a matter of how you make space to address that conflict and plan for it ahead of time.
So the part Carol raises such an important point, Carol, and around the whole piece of how difficult it is. Sometimes you get resistance of people thinking that people with lived experience don't necessarily have expertise, right? They're usually the people that you see as being the ones that you need to work with or that have issues. But so you all might have some wisdom. I'm just going to make one comment. In reality, they're human beings like the rest of us, and we have our own strengths and our own weaknesses, and some of the strengths might go that you happen to be good at research or know the research part of it, but not necessarily that you know the reality of the people that you're trying to do the research on, thinking that you're doing such a good thing, but from their perspective, it's like, oh my goodness. It's like you're nowhere in the ballpark related to some of this stuff. So but it is a learning opportunity and takes time in terms of getting to that point of being able to value. Sandra and Robin, you might have some other thoughts related to it.
Yeah, I think one of the most difficult things, right, is to actually know that you have to share power. It is often the thing that holds us back, knowing that we have to share power and we need to share power. And I think when you say share power, it makes you think deeper, in my opinion, about what is expected to happen in the space, right? And I think a young lady shared, Angela shared, it's hard to, I use the term stepping up and stepping back, right? So when you're in that space, it's hard to limit your voice. So even for me as a parent, right, lived experience as a community organizer, there are others, when I come into the space with others, I have to remind myself that I need to step back, right? I need to share my power. And when I say my power, my experience, I may have more experience in the area than someone else. And I think that is the hardest thing to do. But when you do it, it is the most fabulous outcome. And I'll step back and let Robin give some input.
Yeah, Sandra, I think you really covered my experience as well. And it does start with that power sharing piece. But for me as well, I had to be willing to step up and take that role, right? And be brave enough to say, yes, I can do this. And once again, as I said before, having a team of champions and cheerleaders around it to remind me that that's where I belong was really important. So as you're creating your team, you can be that person. You can find those people to support you, people with a lived experience, so that they can feel they can embrace the shift in culture as well, so that they can feel like their voice is being heard. Now, make no mistake, people with lived experience know that they have important things to say, right? They know that they're an important piece of this project. You don't have to convince them of that part. You just have to learn to be in the same room together and do that with respect and understanding. So yeah, thank you, Sandra.
Robin, I think the part that you highlighted in the chat, I think is helpful, related to, we use the language in the tool, there's subject matter experts. And so, that might be some of the reframe that you all might want to be trying on as part of your teaming, that you might be doing whatever relevant project that you'll be working on. And they might give you language, if you're actually open enough to ask the people with lived experience in terms of helping with some of that process. So.
And Julie, hi, this is Kirk. I think that subject matter experts was a term that was used early on in the research agenda development. And I think, and Sandra and Robin can weigh in on this, I think that the title of lived experience experts was intentionally made by y'all's group, that y'all suggested that as a way to elevate that voice and have it be comparable in kind of stature. So there was an equality working there. And when I look at a lot of these comments, I really think about how there has got to be a lot of work done prior to implementing this kind of tool and having this kind of conversation, because it sounds like there's some work that needs to be done of just having agreement on how decisions are made, how we handle challenging conversations. And let me just say that we did not have that figured out at the beginning of this project. We learned as we go. And you know, Sandra and Robin, I mean, we had tough conversations at the beginning of saying, hey, something's not right here. How can we kind of adjust? And being open to having those conversations built that relationship and that engagement and that trust that made it so much easier to do the work. And so investing in that relationship building was so critical to the long-term success of what we were trying to do.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah, I just want to echo what you said about trust. That trust building process that Kirk just mentioned really has carried over into the development of the process development of the tool itself. And because our group has been together for some time, we trust each other a lot. And like, I can more easily ask, so say, hey, you know, what do you think about this word or this phrase? And I will receive the feedback very quickly, oftentimes. Or sometimes I might mess up and say the wrong thing, or, you know, not quite do the right thing. And I'm open and willing to hear that. And I want to hear that, you know, from my colleagues, because that's how, you know, we build and change and keep, you know, keep the trust going. So there is a lot of like, it's just so much iteration and back and forth that takes place. That's hard to even put words to it sometimes, but hopefully you're getting a sense of that through what we're describing here today.
And this is Robin. I just wanted to add, you know, and also as project leadership, you can do a lot to model this behavior, right? You can take on some choices and say, this is how we do things. And other folks are going to say, oh, that's how we do it now. For instance, I've always said, you know, we're all human beings. What we see can, you know, change how we act and how we behave in this world. For instance, when you do a list of names, when there's people with initials after their names, they always come first. And then in the end, you see lived experience expert. So I'd always challenge people, why aren't our names first? Why aren't our names first on that publication or on that announcement? And I'm here to say, when we first started working with you, Julie, I brought that up, and absolutely the next thing they published had the name, my name, and the name of the other lived experience expert at the top of the document. And that went out to all of your organizations. So they saw that you were already using equity to lift our names up to the place of team. And so you have a lot to do with how you model the behavior for the people on your team as well.
So I will just add, and let me just give a little hats off to Peter, because it is very challenging to be in a space and that work is moving and you want the work to move, and you just like, oh, we got to get this done. But Peter allowed, and Kirk can attest to this as well, because we were in a work group together, that the space was given to have that conversation. Lord knows I cannot tell you how important that is for that work to even continue. And I will say it again, I don't believe we would be where we're at right now if there was not a pause in the work to allow for all of that to be addressed. And if I could say one thing, I think that when we first think about equity and having someone with lived experience, when we first decide to have that voice at the table, we are moving towards equity. We are saying that that's important. We may not know exactly how to do it, but I will tell you that lived experience folk are willing to stay in that space to get it right. So I would encourage anyone that has not done it, that's moving towards doing it, to know that it is going to be bumpy, but just stay with it. And I think for me personally, I am glad that I came out of my head and said, you need to stay here. You need to bring your voice, and you need to be able to bring your voice truthfully in this space so that there can be some change. And so for that, I am thankful that the team, Peter, it stopped to allow for that voice to be heard.
Very much. Thank you so much, Sandra. definitely hats off to Peter for all of the turbulation and bumps in the road, and it's been a beautiful but bumpy process, right? So I just want to make a few more comments about the tool and then open it up to Q&A. I wanted to mention that, I think we've hit that point pretty well, that this is an iterative, long-term process. It requires investment. And the investment, I believe, is worth it. Data is more valid. You can help people guide what your measurement's going to be. Is a little bit of controversy about that. However, my view is you need to be measuring what you're meant to measure, right? And that means more validity for your data outcomes. And it helps with translation. If you have people on board from the beginning that believe in this project and you're trying to develop an intervention, just imagine how much easier it might be to get people to uptake that intervention in communities that perhaps they haven't wanted to do before. So if you have that early buy-in and engagement and that process along over time, then I believe that it will result in very good community-based outcomes. And then I just wanted to also mention that part of the tool, I'm not sure if it was mentioned yet or not, but there's a resources piece to the tool at the very end. We tried to, again, make that more on the pithy end. We tried to share some resources that maybe might enhance this current tool. Again, we didn't want to recreate something that was already done, but we wanted to enhance the other tools or knowledge that is already out there. So we provided some of those resources, and we would love to hear any input if you think there might be something useful for us to add. I just want to put in one more plug and reminder that the current title of our tool really emphasizes researchers, and we want to be able to have other groups of people use the tool. So we might need to do some adapting, but we will also be looking for new titles of the tool in the future. So if you have any ideas about how to be more inclusive about evaluators and program developers within the title, please do share. We are also trying to keep the title pithy, so it's a little bit challenging for us. But I just want to say again, this tool is still in work. We want to keep accepting feedback and making it better and be responsive to those who are going to use it. So with that, I think I will turn it over to the Q&A session. Oh, Julie, sorry, Julie. I'm going to turn it over to Julie for a few minutes to talk about the future and the next steps.
Okay, so if you go to the next slide, you'll see. So we have a few opportunities, and essentially Jessica touched on some of them, but please go access it. Begin providing either the feedback or testing it. So maybe you're the new researcher that's going to be applying for funding. We've been doing an immense amount of work, Peter and others, of trying to educate foundations and funding sources to really begin focusing on filling some of the gaps, but also beginning to really use some of this DEI framework, et cetera. So setting the stage for you to be able to use some of this. So test it and give us feedback. You can do so through the website. We're continuing to do always ongoing presentations and sharing of this information as broadly as we can. So we'll be at the social work Society for Social Work Research Conference that's coming up in early 2025. So many of you might be there, or I encourage you to be there. And as part of the special interest groups, it'll be touched on what there, and then again at CWLA's conference in April, and there's always adding new ones. So you'll have other opportunities for exposure if you want. And the other piece that I just wanted to let you know in terms of the further research part is through this project and funded particularly by Annie Casey Foundation, CWLA is doing a special issue of our Child Welfare Journal, again with the intent of really getting more of the voice of the people with lived experience in research and child welfare in particular. And so we are doing this. It'll be coming out in 2025. And we had a huge number of abstracts that were submitted to it. So lots of interest in terms of helping to move some of this, in particular in the arena of child welfare research. So this will be coming out. You'll have opportunity to be exposed to some of the latest research in projects that have really done this and involved people with lived experience. But I need to let you know, the two co-editors that are doing this with me are both researchers, emerging professionals that also have lived experience, and Jessica is one of those. And then we have a team of advisory group that are partnering and moving right along there with us throughout the whole of what we're doing, and all of them have lived experience, a spectrum of them, and Robin is one of those individuals that is participating in it. So we're trying to do the living of it as we do the special issue as well. So with that, I'm turning it over for the Q&A piece.
Oh, thank you very much. I think that brings it to me. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. So I'm Gautam Yadama again, for those of you who joined later or in between. And I'm Dean of the Boston College School of Social Work. But a lot of my experience is in research that is community-based, but also it's research practice partnerships. Excellent presentation, and very much an important topic, both for those in the academic space doing research, but also those who are from community and lived experience on how to engage, if you will, the other and each other. So let me just make a couple of synthesizing points before I channel some of the questions. What I think we've heard is that in all of this work, it's not about researchers coming with a set of questions and answering it to their satisfaction. It's really about researching an idea that reflects what is actually happening out there in the real world. And this is where, unless you join forces with those who are living in that world, you're not going to truly represent and reflect what you're after. Because our policies, our program interventions, our policy propositions and proposals have to be reflecting that real world and eventually move the needle in real people's lives. And that's the crux of the matter here. Why what our panelists have so eloquently spoken about, why we need to be doing this with some care and seriousness. So that's point one. Another point that is very important that we must remember and think about very carefully is that in this, one of the major barriers is something that the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein long time ago identified, which is the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. So this idea of the limits of my language mean the limits of my world is equally relevant here to both the researcher who's coming from the academic side, the community organizer, community development person, or the activist, or the lived experience person. Because we all are limited by the language we know. And the world we see is shaped by the language we use and understand. And I think another aspect of this is, how do we overcome the limits of our language, whether it's been learned through lived experience or learned, in other ways. And the last point I want to make here is about mental models. I think in all of this, what I've heard today is that we are trying to represent authentically and truthfully the mental models that shape the decisions and the behaviors of those who are living a certain experience. And the question because those mental models or views of the reality shape our decisions. So if I do X, and I believe that if I do X, it results in Y, because of my experience in the world, I will do X because if I want Y. No matter how much as a researcher I come in and I say, no, you must not do X because it doesn't cause Y, it's not going to impact the person who's only understood that X causes Y because of their own experience. So this is part of the challenge of representing and integrating the mental models of those who are living an experience and whose situations we are all together collaborating to change or even invest in to make that flourishing even more, whatever it is, right? So that's the last point I want to make, because these framings are important in all of this, why our panelists so eloquently spoke about why this work is important. So with that, let me, I think some of the questions that have come up are, I think I have great difficulty sometimes seeing the point of view of my coworkers, or I have great difficulty seeing the point of view of the other, because the person who is living the experience is not getting the researcher's perspective of what they're trying to extrapolate. How do you panelists broach such fundamental differences that show up as you're working? This is, I think, one question that's coming up. To the panelists.
Can
I
I,
can, oh, go
I'm-
ahead, Sandra.
that's key, right? Because when I began my involvement, I had already had community research experience in a different format, right? So from welfare. So it seemed obvious to me that this would work out, but the language was different, right? And I didn't understand going into this work in child welfare that the researchers that were there were charged with a particular thing, right? And they were not continuously involved in whatever that particular thing was, right? So, an administration said, I need to know A, B, and C. They went out and found out A, B, and C, gave it back to the administrator, and hands up, they were finished. But me understanding that in that space helped me to level down and understand where the researchers were coming from. Because without that, I would have been very guarded and stayed guarded in that space about how the work was done. why they really had no relationship in the community, that they didn't get their credentials because no one believed that people that were impacted had really anything to give, right? And this is not all researchers, because I know researchers that are doing the work. So it was interesting to me to find out what was happening for researchers, or not going to happen for researchers who did not, or who did do community, participatory community work. Thank you.
I'll just add really quickly that we did think about this problem a bit, and we tried to build in some points within the tool. Like you mentioned, we often don't have the same type of language, and one word to one person might mean totally something different to another person. And so I can't identify where exactly the item is, but somewhere in there is an item referencing making time and space to actually talk about key terms. What do these key terms mean to each member of the team, and really authentically listening and creating ongoing opportunities for bidirectional learning. So not just the researcher telling the people with lived expertise, which sounds very ironic, right? This is what this means, but asking them and listening and hearing, what does it mean to you? And, considering that and how you approach the research, and then how you also interpret the data.
Oh, thank you. Those are very useful. One of the question that, I'm seeing a little bits of it, but let me ask it in my language. How would you use this tool over time? Because these are not one-off partnerships. If these are truly community research partnerships, then they are evolving over time. So how would you suggest, what are some ways of using this tool or any other insights you might have to monitor the evolution and the dynamic of the partnership, where people initially might not be listening, but over time begin to?
Thank you so much for that comment. We were trying to be pithy again, but we did try to build in a variation of items that kind of got to some of that nuance. So maybe you might not be, maybe you are not at all on some things, but maybe you're at some on other items. And that's great. This is your starting point, and where do you want to be over time? And it's not a competition. I would really want to emphasize that. It's growth within the team, and where does a team want to go? We also have the comment section for team members to, collectively add comments, narrative about where they're at the present time that they're engaging with the tool, so they can reflect back on that the next time that they engage with the tool.
And I think that they could be doing it at different times through their project, right? That sometimes it's helpful to you've got figured out the what you're going to be doing, and you've gotten into it X number of months, and you come back to relook at that to say, okay, where are we at related to this? So that you're always looking at what you could be improving. And some of the research has its own stages, so you could be doing it based on the research. Some program development has its own stages, or the evaluation, so you could do it around that. But I think you'll find that you'll begin to, even once you have one team and you've been through a whole cycle getting your research done, you're going to realize that you want to be working on another project, that you're going to be, so that it really will continue to have an evolutionary kind of process that grows. in terms of other pieces.
Thank you. I know we're at 2:30 or 1:30 Central. Nicholas, but before, let me just close with one thought. And then I'll turn it over to the organizers, which is, this is a very important element of how we do research that results and translates into interventions. But it's not research for the sake of research, but for moving, addressing social impact. And interesting, there are many approaches and methods in this that might help us, but I think the key for all of us is to go in, and someone actually mentioned this, and I want to reiterate it, by restraining one's own voice to create spaces for shared power to emerge. And I think when we all restrain, we grow that common space for the power to be shared and grown. And with that, let me turn it over, and thank you. It's been my privilege to listen to this today and moderate on behalf of the Academy. And I look forward to seeing how this work emerges on the part of all the panelists. Over to you, moderating.
Thank you so much, Gautam, and thank you everybody for joining, and in our attendees for being here with us. Thank you to our speakers and presenters today and our discussants. We appreciate all of you for sharing your time with us. There is a link in the chat to view the recordings for all of the sessions in this series, and you can also catch that link here on the screen share. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. What a rich discussion. Thank you. Thank you for that.
That was so awesome. It was like the cherry on top of our webinar series. So thank you so much for letting us end on such a strong note.
Thank you, Nicholas.